I grew up as a diplomat's daughter, so I lived all over the world. And this experience was both very difficult because of the constant change, but it also developed in me an adaptability and also maybe a deeper appreciation for what my country is all about. Anyway, to make a long story short, I've always felt very proud to be Lebanese. And it was sometimes a challenge to dispel stereotypes and preconceptions about the country. I lived abroad for most of my life until we came back in 2003. So many countries and continents. The last was the Gulf. And we came back by choice because we felt that we wanted to be closer to our parents who are aging, and also to kind of reconnect with our roots and what we're about. My husband is an avid hiker, and when we got married, I had never hiked before. And so the first few years, I felt I needed to understand what is this passion he has. And that's where my hiking experience started, with him in the Rockies in Wyoming. When we returned to Lebanon, we decided to discover our country. And inevitably, I was put in contact through a friend, Michel Mufarij, who is a tour operator among many things. He's a very brilliant man. And he put me in touch with the Lebanon Mountain Trail. And after hiking a few times, I realized there was a story to be told about this trail. Because it was a lot more than a trail, it was basically, it put together a lot of what Lebanon is, and as far as its diversity, nature, culture, history, the people, and most importantly, the welcome of the people in the mountains. And when the first through walk was going to be inaugurated in 2009, I was invited to be one of the team of the first 6 people to have the privilege of hiking the trail in its entirety for the first time. And the result of that was my first book, A Million Steps, which is not really a guidebook. It's more my personal experience in the mountains and my discoveries. And many of the discoveries were predictable, like, oh, the beauty, oh, the unknown areas, the undiscovered parts, as far as most people, of the country and the riches it holds, both culturally, heritage-wise, and in all aspects. And the most enriching part of that experience for me was actually staying in the villagers' homes and having an intimate perspective of their lives and their challenges and what it's all about. Because I'm a Beiruti, I didn't up until then have much knowledge of what mountain life really was about, and how really precious it is. And I always used to envy my friends who would say, oh, we're going to our village in the mountains, and I didn't have one. And I thought, that's so special to have that. And now I call so many villages home in the mountains because of the welcome and just the way they just draw you in as family. I really do feel like family in many of these homes. So I discovered many things, and one of the most unexpected was the amount of dishes that I had never heard of before. And I'm kind of a foodie. I love to cook, I love to entertain, and I considered myself quite knowledgeable in Lebanese cuisine, but I had no idea. And it was not necessarily the complexity, but just the simplicity of combining certain ingredients in a different way that was so wonderful. And it happened on the first day I was there, the first night. I spent in a village. It was in Tasha, in Akkar. And they served us for breakfast beit bizatar. And I was like, wow, this works so well. How come nobody has thought to do this? Why isn't this more common? Anyway, this curiosity of this diversity is what led eventually to my second book, Mayylu, because I felt that this exceptional diversity in such a small area, which Lebanon is relatively, on a global scale, it's such a small country, how is it possible to have such diversity in its cuisine? So this curiosity, but also this appreciation for what so many things we don't know about the country. I wanted to kind of draw attention to this. But also, more importantly, in my experiences in the Lebanese mountains, I became more aware of the challenges that people in the villages face, especially economic issues, and especially now, but even before. Lebanon is a very centralized country, and a lot of the remote areas are so neglected. And I felt that was a shame, and I felt there was a steady depopulation of villages migrating to the cities just to find livelihoods. So my first experience with, empowering rural sustainable opportunities happened when I became a board member of the Lebanon Mountain Trail Association, and I was very much involved with rural development and rural support and creating empowering and sustainable opportunities for people in the villages, because there was an urgency to help people stay in their villages. Because with every migration, we lose a little bit of who we are. We lose a little bit of our identity. And then, of course, I came in contact with the Food Heritage Foundation at AUB and their amazing work they've done in Darb al-Karam and in capacity building for women in villages so that they can make livelihoods out of preparing food and hosting people and preparing mouni that has been undergone, training of food safety and hygiene and all of that. And I felt that there was a bit of a missing link of people knowing about these, that this is an option in our mountains, that one can go and have a home-cooked meal instead of going to a restaurant. Not that I have anything against restaurants, but I felt that this is just a natural way to create financial opportunities. And I found that with the years that I've been working here in this particular field, that it does make a big difference for these people. And who I am, I started off as a civil engineering major, and I ended up writing a cookbook about Lebanese cuisine. Mayylu is a food book, not a cookbook, meaning that Mayylu is not just about the recipes in the book, but the stories associated with these dishes, about the people and the land from where the food came. The other thing about Mayylu is none of the recipes in the book are actually recipes that you might know. So I insisted on including the most uncommon recipes to highlight the diversity. And since it's about the story of the food, I decided to organize the book not according to food type, but according to areas and villages and the women whose recipes we're talking about. So, for example, the first chapter is about the north. And so it's a landscape of the north, and the first lady included in this book is Hana El-Hibri from And It. And it's a collection of her recipes, جرميش, كبة عدس بالشاورما, راس بقمح. I should actually quiz people when I read these recipes, because most people have never heard of them unless they come from the village itself. One of my, this is for me a very interesting lady because she is actually a pottery maker. And the pots she makes are actually, I asked her, how long have people been making this in Asia? And she said, since the time of Christ. And I was thinking, well, this is kind of an exaggeration. Let me check this out. Actually, this way of making pots is close to 10,000 years old. This is one of the first cooking utensils that man used. And in Asia, it's a uniquely women's craft, though men are not allowed to, well, she lets her husband tend to the fire, but apart from that, they make the pots. And so this for me was really interesting. Also, I would like to, this is, so Samia and Marwan Naufal live in Bygone. And Marwan is a natural storyteller. And he told me so many stories about the origins of lahm bkhal and kibbet bawabni and so on. And he just represents how much there is out there to learn and the connections that end up with these very unusual dishes and unusual ingredients. The lahm bkhal story is a beautiful story about a man who went to Turkey and brought this dish back and ended up in Mayylu. And Mayylu is the only town, as far as I know, in all of Lebanon that uses the shayat and quince and pomegranates in their stew. A very quick story here about briquette. Briquette are only in Marja'yun. Briquette are a pastry that look like sambusik, but what's unusual about it is the filling, which is basically onions and walnuts and eggs. And I was so intrigued about this because it was so, I'd never seen anything like it. And I didn't understand, why is it only briquette, only in Marja'yun? And I was talking to my son, who's quite knowledgeable in Middle Eastern history, and he told me, I told him, you know, the closest thing I know to this is brique in Tunis. And he said, well, Mom, you know, in World War I, the French sent the Foreign Legion and they were stationed in the south. So they left a little bit of Tunis in Marja'yun, and it's the only town that does them. So that's just a small sample of the stories that are in the book, and I hope that people will not just try to make the recipes, but try them with these amazing women. Today I've chosen 3 simple recipes. This intriguing concept of a trail that traversed the country from north to south on what I call the backbone of the country, the Western Mountain Chain, was really intriguing for me. And so I went on this quest for the story behind the Lebanon Mountain Trail, not just the fact that it's a trail that people can do. And what I discovered is that, well, first of all, the experience of hiking for 30 days in and of itself is extremely grounding and helps you realign your perspectives of life when you are detached from a lot of tech and internet and so on, just by virtue of the fact that you're in the mountains, was in and of itself a very rewarding experience. And I remember, I mean, I'm starting at the end, but I remember the trail is, well, the trail has varied in length. When I hiked it, it was 450. Now it has become 470 kilometers because they've had to do many diversions due to loss of the trail itself, and that's something I'll talk about in a minute. But I remember on our very last day, we were taking our last picnic between Hasbaya and Marja'yun, and I looked at my teammates. We were sitting under a big oak grove having our last picnic lunch on the trail, and I looked at everyone's face, and they looked so relaxed. They looked rejuvenated. They looked like they had done Botox, you know? And I think I account part of that to detaching from the artificialness of city life, the going back to the rhythms of nature. Because when you hike all day, You sleep early and you wake up early, kind of like with the sun. You very rarely will stay up till midnight when you're a hiker on a hiking trek. So that was one thing. And then all the layers of history began to unfold, like Phoenician, Roman, Ottoman, colonial. And every day there was something that reminded you of the very ancient history of this country. You encountered them on the trail itself. And, if you're fortunate enough to be with a knowledgeable guide, you get all the stories that come along with this area and the folklore and the myths and the legends of this place. And then, secondly, when my friends first heard that I was going to hike for 30 days, they said, okay, nature is lovely and beautiful and all of that, but 30 days, come on, you're going to get bored. Like, okay, trees and nature and mountains and rivers. وبعدين, yani. And at the end of the trip, I realized that never did I get blasé or bored about what I was seeing, because each day was different. Each day the landscape changed, the fauna changed, the color of the soil changed. It went from steep gorges to rolling hills to rivers to lakes, and which is also something very exceptional, having hiked in so many countries. Lebanon is not, saying Lebanon is the most beautiful country is a big statement. There is beauty everywhere in the world, but this diversity in nature is very exceptional. I have not encountered it anywhere. And, a lot, through the years, I have, hiked with many foreigners who came from overseas to hike the trail. And so many of them keep on coming back. They could hike anywhere they wanted. So there is a certain magic about the trail. And it's a combination of so many things, but I think it's the people that really make it. It's the people that create this feeling of being welcome and the generosity. And even when you hike it more than once, somehow you still discover something new. Tabbouleh is kind of synonymous with Lebanon, but what I discovered is there are so many different kinds of tabbouleh, and none of them are the ones that we know with the traditional, parsley and burghul and all of that. One of the recipes that really intrigued me was tabbouleh adas from Miristi and Shuf. The cook's name is Basima Zaidan, and basically the whole thing is soaking the lentils the night before. So the lentils are instead of the burghul, and what she does also is she soaks the onions in olive oil and cinnamon at least 15 minutes before she adds it. And what she said, and I've tried it and it's true, it takes away the sharpness and the indigestibility of the onion. Something happens when you put the olive oil with the onion. So basically, it's your regular parsley and mint and the lentils. And then here I have a little bit of tomato paste with lemon juice and a little bit of chili powder. And I like to mix them well before I add the tomatoes so that the tomatoes don't get squished. I'm going to add the onions. Sorry about the whole onion thing, Anthony, but it's part of the recipe. And I have around 4 other tabbouleh recipes. None of them are traditional. But this is my favorite because it's adding protein to your tabbouleh. And it actually looks quite pretty too. And salt to taste, of course. Voila. I think that I owe a lot of my interest in food actually to my father. My father was a diplomat, but he loved entertaining. And he was actually very hands-on involved with even like the setup of whatever event it was, whether it be National Day or so on. For him, food and the presentation of food was how you honored your guests. And my mother is a great cook. She learned how to cook in Italy, actually. They spent 6 years in Italy. And so I think this love of food and entertaining I took from my parents. It's basically, I feel, it's a reflection of who you are. It's part of our identity as Lebanese, inextricably. You know, Lebanese and food go together. And this is what I think was one of the driving forces that writing and publishing a book is quite a daunting experience. And you put a lot of yourself in it, and there's a lot of insecurity. And am I going to do right by, you know, representing what the country is about? But this was part of the passion, was Lebanon is a lot more than just hummus and tabbouleh and kibbeh. Those are also very special things. And a lot of people are beginning to claim that they're theirs. Food is cuisine, I feel, is a very dynamic thing. It's not static. There's no right recipe for tabbouleh. There's no right recipe for kibbeh. People tend to think of it as the way my mom made it, that's the right way it should be, which is normal. But Lebanon has demonstrated that it is a very dynamic process. And my findings in this whole journey, why this diversity? So there are some of the kind of obvious things like, okay, we have been a crossroads and you know, so many civilizations have gone through this country, each one leaving something, a grain, a vegetable, a way of doing something. And that has accumulated. Plus we have the diversity in our nature. So what grows in the Bikar is different from what goes Bijrud al-Aoura, and then in Akkar, then in the south. And we have the coast. So that is a contributing factor. And also the diversity in religions and the traditions that come with these religions. And food is very closely linked to these special events, be it Christmas or Eid al-Fitr or whatever. There are traditional dishes that are associated with each one of those, and that brings something as well. But my most interesting revelation, it might not be a revelation to everybody, but for me, is actually the immensity of our diaspora and what the immigrant populations bring back to Lebanon. So I have a few stories in the book that actually connect those dots, and like Metti, where it came from. It came from the mainly Druze communities who immigrated to South America, namely Venezuela and Argentina and so on. And now Metti is very much a part of mountain life in the mountains. But there are so many other examples. And to me, the stories are really what's intriguing and kind of contributes to the uniqueness of our cuisine. But even now, you know, I see the dynamic process and how cooks who have been cooking certain things for generations start adapting to food trends and food tastes. And so it's an ongoing process, but it's also important to preserve the old recipes. And for me, that was also an important thing in Mayylu, is to preserve some of these recipes that could eventually be lost, because a lot of young people don't cook like their parents. And a lot of these dishes, the recipes are handed down orally. So there's no actually written record of them. And I felt that was something really important. And especially the whole segment of wild edible plants and their importance. Their importance as a staple food, but also their benefits, which I think slowly but surely is being lost. And I feel that's something that I would like to highlight more, inshallah, if I'm given the opportunity to. When we decided to build this house, our initial idea was we wanted a traditional Lebanese house in the mountains. But our architect felt that a traditional Lebanese house would not give us what we wanted, which was closeness to nature and to feel that we are really in the mountains. So he changed our whole vision, and he said, you're going to have a very transparent house. And we wanted the transition from indoor to outdoor to be almost seamless. And this included the kitchen. So as you know, we have a forest outside, and we wanted to bring the forest into the kitchen. So we decided to do what they call, I think it's the open book technique, where they match the seams of the... So this is actually one olive tree. And we wanted to have breakfast as close to the trees as possible. So we decided to move the kitchen out to the very edge of the forest. Hey, habibeti, haydoli. Anyone who's been in the States recently, gone to Whole Foods or Costco or Trader Joe's, sees racks and racks of hummus variation, pesto variations, jalapeno variations. But actually, because we have generations old recipes of these variations that nobody knows about. And one of the variations I really liked was the pumpkin tahini. There's no hummus in this. It's just pumpkin and tahini. And it's, you know, a really tasty and nice variation as a dip or a side dish. I personally like to use the tahini at Café Noel because they press it in front of you. And so the only ingredient in this whole thing is sesame seeds, nothing else. And they've even actually done their own bit for like recycling and so on. And you can take your own jar and they will fill your jar for you and save on, you know, more glass and so on being. So this is basically around 3/4 cup of tahini. I'm going to add the garlic and the lemon juice. So this recipe comes from Risti Shuf, and it's Basima Zaidan's recipe. And what I love about these mountain recipes is they're very seasonal. So they would make the latin or pumpkin, it kind of lasts for a few months, so you don't have to have it when it's being harvested, which makes, it gives you a lot more flexibility with when you can make it. Basically, you chop and boil the pumpkin and you let it strain for as long as you can, at least 3 to 4 hours, to make sure that the moisture comes out. And then you put it in, I like to use the blender. I find it's easier than the handheld thing. Now, typically when you add lemon to tahini, it becomes very thick. So I saved some of the pumpkin water to keep the taste in, and just to loosen a little bit the mixture. If you want it to harden a little bit, just refrigerate it for like an hour before serving. Ka'ak bil khuzami, or lavender, from Rahayel. Part of the unusualness of this recipe is actually the inclusion of lavender in the recipe. They use lavender quite a bit in their cooking, which is very uncommon anywhere, actually. So basically, it has lavender, cardamom, and 4 cups of flour and 1 cup of semolina flour. The flour that I use actually is also from Rahayel, and it's a local endemic grain called salamuni. It's a kind of wheat that grows at very high elevations, and it's an ancient grain, and I found that I tolerate it much better than most flours, and I use it in most of my cooking now. So basically, you combine all the dry ingredients together, and then we will add the milk and the butter, and we will knead the dough. So Mayylu, I launched Mayylu a year ago. It's available in most bookstores, but in particular Librairie Antoine. It's also available on Amazon.com in the US. I recently launched Mayylu in a food bookstore called Now Serving in LA. So it's also available there. And I hope that this book will be a catalyst to shed light not just on our culinary heritage, but to also show the different options we have in the country as far as food beyond the traditional Lebanese restaurant.